Welcome to the Parenting with Impact podcast with your hosts Elaine Taylor-Klaus and Diane Dempster, co-creators of ImpactParents.com, an online community, award-winning blog, and service organization helping parents all over the world to raise complex kids become capable, independent adults.
Hi everyone, Elaine and Diane here, and we know that you want your complex kids to grow up to be happy and independent, and yet you're not always sure how or when to help with that.
In this podcast, we'll encourage you to collaborate with all kinds of complex kids and support them in navigating life and learning.
And we'll interview leading experts from around the world, as well as parents in our own community, talking about how training for parents actually helps these complex kids.
We'll talk about the issues we hear parents struggling with all the time and how a coach approach can support and empower your amazing young people.
We won't tell you what to do. We're going to help you figure out how. So let's move on to the next conversation. Welcome back, everybody, to another conversation in the Parenting with Impact podcast. Diane and Elaine here, and we are talking about a new framework that we came up with to kind of...
Oh my God, we are always like coming up with some framework or something. It makes me laugh because like when we look at the model, Elaine and I created this model back at her kitchen table in, was it 2011, yep. 2011 in the like winter time between the 2 months. And it's like that model has only had little teeny tiny tweaks, but then all of a sudden we get this other great idea. And so there's all these other things that we've added on to it. And so this is the newest thing we were playing with.
Well, and here's what I'll say is that there's this macro model, right? Yeah. There's how you manage navigating any kind of complex issue that you're facing. You know, you take aim, you collect information, et cetera, et cetera. That's what we teach.
That's our main model.
That's our main model. There's an episode, I think the first or second episode. We'll go
through the model. We need to find that.
So I think we'll put that in the show notes. But so there's a model. And then we have a lot of frameworks within the model to help navigate more specific issues, right?
Well, it's to help navigate more specific issues. And the reason we put them into frameworks is because it helps us as adult learners to remember them, right? So if you can remember, like, I think about ACE and ABI and all those like little acronym-y things that we apply to things, it helps us as adult learners to go, oh, wait, I can remember ABI in a different way than I can.
It's a kind of a variation on a mnemonic, right? Yeah. There are things that help us learn. And so we have some cool frameworks. So maybe we'll put some of our frameworks in the links in the show notes, just so people can go find
all the other frameworks, ABI
and some of the others, right?
Okay. So today's framework is the 3A's.
And can I just give a little more context before we go?
Yeah. No,
okay.
yeah.
So we do a back to school webinar every year, September, October, and we're always kind of looking and saying, okay, what are the topics that are coming up this year? What do we think? What are we experiencing that parents are dealing with? And how do we kind of give really good meaty stuff and also make it simple and easy to use? And so go ahead.
What I was going to say is that, part of what we started with in the event where we taught this was like most of the challenges that you're facing as parents of complex kids kind of boil down to 3 things. Either your kid has lagging executive function skills, your kid has stress and overwhelm, or you've got communication and trust issues that have been built up. So those were the 3 kind of boil it down to some of the 3 common challenge areas that you're facing. And so the 3A's were...
Hold on, I'm not ready.
No, go. I'm not going to say what they were. I was going to say that they're the solution. The 3A's were the solution for like, well, so what do I do with all 3 of these things, with the executive function, with the stress and overwhelm, with the communication and trust issues, right?
Right. And so there are, in our framework, 50 different tools that you could use to address these issues. But that can be really overwhelming.
Right.
And so part of what this framework, have we already mentioned it's called the 3A's? I guess
the 3A's.
Title, the 3A's. Part of what this framework will help you do is to compartmentalize it a little bit when you're dealing with any challenging situation. And our goal is to give you frameworks to tackle any challenging situation you're dealing with, any age, child, or young adult.
Yes.
So whatever you're dealing with, if you can let this be the first question, is this something that requires me to A, or A?
We're still like totally teasing them and not telling them what the 3A's are.
Okay, so now I'm ready for you to dive into what are the 3 A's?
The 3 A's are avoid, accommodate, or act.
So what does that mean?
And before we say that, one of the things I want to make sure we also include as context is that we want to do this with an experimenter's mind. We want to do this as an experiment. One of the things that parents come to us all the time with is like, I've got to fix this. This is terrible. I've got to do something right now.
This
right?
has got to stop.
This has got to stop. Right. And so we want to hold it a little lighter than that if we can. And if we're having a hard time holding it a little lighter, go listen to one of the podcasts where we're talking about stress and overwhelm specifically, because it might be your stress and overwhelm that's making it harder to hold it lightly. These are things to experiment with. These aren't like, okay, this is the solution. That's one of the things I love about us compared to some other resources out there that are like, if this happens, do this. If this happens, do that.
Because that's always
doesn't work if you have a complex kid. But it's really, what do I experiment with? And so simplifying, you want to experiment with, do I avoid something? Do I accommodate something? Or do I take some action? And those are the 3 things. So what is it? I mean, I think the words are fairly simplistic, but what does it mean?
Dive in. Okay. Yeah. So when you're tackling, and here's another context. Part of what happens when you're tackling a complicated situation is that we have to figure out what's underneath the situation, what's leading to the situation, what's causing that particular unwanted behavior or dynamic, right? And the example I've been using a lot lately, Diane, is if your kid is hesitant to do something that might have some social or communication dynamic, if that's coming about because there's a social anxiety, you're going to handle it differently than if they're doing it because they actually don't know what appropriate behavior is or what to do, right? And so your solution is going to be different based on what's driving the problem in the first place.
Right. Or that it's an executive function challenge. And so your kid has a hard time avoiding distractions, which makes them really hard to engage in social settings, right?
Right. So or they've got a language processing issue. And so they're not really keeping up with the conversation. And I remember one of my kids used to come home and she's like, I have no idea what my friends are talking about.
Right.
School.
So the precursor of this is what I'm hearing you say is like, it's what's going on underneath it. And maybe it's those 3 things we were talking about earlier: lagging executive function skills, stress and overwhelm, communication and trust issues. Maybe it's something that's going on for you. Maybe it's something that's going on for your kiddo. But to start there, and the reminder for all of us is that when we ask, like, what is going on, is that we don't just start with the obvious snarky response. We really look at—
they're rude. They're disrespectful.
Yeah, it's like parents
they don't care.
Getting homework done. And it's like, well, they don't get their homework done because they like gaming more than they like homework. I'm like, okay, well, who doesn't like gaming more than they like homework? And our kids know that they need to do homework. And so there's probably something else that's at play there besides just preferences, right?
Or they may know, but they haven't accepted that they need to do homework. Or like I was talking to my young adult son's partner, and I was sharing with them something that my eldest kid said in high school, which had really stuck with me all these years now, more than 10 years later. Don't you see, Mom, if I haven't done it, I haven't done it wrong.
Right.
And I watched this young adult tear up when they heard that, because it just resonated so fully with them, like how much in their life they've avoided because they were afraid of doing something wrong.
Right.
Right. And so, yeah, so there's so much
meat in this. It's like I feel like we're doing 17 different podcast episodes in the middle of this, but bottom line, look at what's going on underneath it and make sure you're really clear at what you're focusing on, because there might be several things going on. And the common things are executive function, stress and overwhelm, communication and trust issues.
Slow down. The common things are executive function challenges, stress and overwhelm, and communication and trust issues, right?
And with any of those, we want to figure out whether we want to avoid doing something, accommodate the situation, or take action.
Right.
So do we want to give an example?
Let's take a break and then go into each of those. You want to do that?
Sure.
Hi, it's Elaine. And if you like this podcast, you'll love our coach approach. Whether you're a parent looking for support or a professional supporting families, we invite you to download a free guide with 12 key coaching tools at impactparents.com/gift. You can begin using a coach approach to help kids become more independent or improve all of your conversations at work and at home. That's impactparents.com/gift. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Diane and I are talking about the 3A's of parenting or navigating complex issues.
Well, and Diane's switching from coffee to water because apparently I'm talking way too fast today. So just so you know, it's okay.
I did have to kind of slow you down there a little bit. Well, that's just because I process slowly. Yeah. So the 3A's are avoid, accommodate, and act. And what we've basically set out is when you're taking aim, sometimes once you've decided what's the problem I'm trying to solve or the issue I'm trying to address, then it's like, okay, what needs to be done to address it? And this is a good framework to say, okay, is this a behavior that I just need to, that either we're trying to help them avoid or that I need to avoid dealing with right now because it's not a priority? Or do I need to accommodate this behavior, or is there some action I need to do? Go ahead.
Well, and I think, when I think about experimenting with avoiding, there's this higher level thing. It's things that we tend to do in these situations that we want to avoid. So the things that we might want to avoid is reacting instead of responding. So we want to avoid jumping in fix it mode, which is what we were
rescuing
or rescuing, right? Which is what we were talking about earlier. We might want to avoid a judgment, sort of making assumptions or judgments. Some of these things we've already talked about is like looking at what's really going on. We want to avoid just saying, well, they just ... right? And so we might want to avoid nagging. Right.
And or feeling like we have to get in there and do something, like that sense of I got to do something, back to that. Right.
Yeah. Well, and we might want to avoid setting unrealistic expectations, right? It's just that's another example of something we might want to avoid. And we might want to avoid a behavior, right? It's just there's a tool within parent behavior training programs that is like, what do they call it? Conscious avoidance? What's the word? It's
active avoidance.
Right? It's just I'm not going to engage with this behavior as a tool to go, okay, wait, I'm going to just let this behavior be because this kid is having a hard time. It's like, I remember really distinctly one of my family members who used to like run around like a top when they were very young, and I won't tell which one it was, but it just letting them be and letting them run around and avoiding making them stop or having to do something. Again, it's this sort of responding versus reacting maybe, but maybe it's just kind of looking the other way from a challenging behavior.
Well, and part of what I think is important here is that's part of what we as parents need to pay attention to and determine is when is this behavior something that it's just not a priority to take this one up. We're already working on this, that, and the other. And this one, we just need to let this slide for now. We're going to come back to it later. Or we've tried to work on this one and they're just not developmentally ready for it yet. And so we may need to continue to scaffold here and take aim on something else.
Right. Well, and it sounds like there's kind of even two parts of avoid, right? And maybe we change the model, but it's
we're still creating it.
Right. Okay. But there's what do I avoid doing? Like it's a sort of stay away from there, do not go to this far land. And there's
pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. That's what I was trying to say. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And also, so maybe things that we want to do differently. We want to avoid doing some of the things that might
reacting, judging, nagging, etc. Okay.
And there may be times that we just kind of ignore or avoid engaging with regard to one of our kids' behaviors.
And so part of what happens, this is interesting. Part of what happens sometimes is people begin to start doing this work with us, and it usually happens at the early end, is parents start questioning, well, does that mean I have no expectations? Does that mean there's no accountability? Does that mean we just let them get away with everything?
Well, and a lot of parents are using like low demand parenting because they don't know what else to do. And I'm not saying that low demand parenting is often a tool to use,
It's just not the only tool.
It's just not the only tool you want to focus in on, right?
Right. And so sometimes, yes, we do need to let go of addressing some behaviors, because if we try to tackle everything all the time, we're going to be overwhelmed. Our kids are going to be overwhelmed, and they never know what we're really asking them to work on. And the value of taking aim that we've learned is that when you're focusing on something very clear and your kid knows, I'm taking aim on getting my backpack ready for school this week. And that means we as a parent can scaffold getting them up in the morning or, to bed at night or other issues. If we can prioritize kind of one key thing at a time for them and scaffold the rest, that may mean that there's some behaviors that are not wanted that we're not going to take issue with this week. We're going to let it go because it's not the time yet. And we can come back to it later. So that act of avoiding, we want to put in the context of, yes, sometimes, but not always. And when you do that, it's because you're working on other things.
Okay. So actively avoid and consciously avoid some of the reactive behaviors that we have as parents. Those are the two parts of avoid.
That's avoid. Okay.
So what about accommodate? So you were just talking about scaffolding, and it made me think about the difference between scaffolding and accommodating. And a lot of times as parents, we hear about accommodations in school. And I want to just remind parents that if your kid is needing accommodations at school, they may also be needing accommodations at home. So it's a great exercise to consciously say, okay, so what accommodations would I have around getting to the dinner table? What accommodations might I have around doing chores or homework or whatever it is? And am I choosing those consciously? So what do you see as the difference between an accommodation and a scaffolding, Elaine?
It's a great question. I think a scaffolding is when we're scaffolding, it's when we're kind of facilitating them doing something, achieving, completing, finishing, whatever, because they're not developmentally ready to do it on their own. And maybe it's, a scaffolding behavior, for example, might be helping set up a kid to know when it's time to do homework or where to do homework or whatever. But an accommodation might be, so here's a shift. So my kid comes home from school and she needs help to figure out what she's got to do that night for homework. So the accommodation might be, for a while, I'm going to take notes while first, when she's younger, I might help her go through and figure out what her homework is. And then that accommodation may shift to, now I'm going to scribe for her while she writes down what her homework is, because she can't figure it out and write it at the same time because she's got dyslexia. And then that may shift as she gets older to supporting her in figuring out what her homework is.
Well, and I think we can kind of use the word scaffolding and accommodation interchangeably. And I don't want to confuse everybody by trying to make them different. But when I think about the difference, I think about accommodation as being something that I'm actively working on, right? So I'm actively working on how am I helping move this child up? Like you were saying, I'll start with this, and then I'm going to move to this, and then I'm going to move with that to that.
Well, but so think about it. Accommodation in a school environment, right, might be this kid's going to do the odd problems in math instead of all the problems in math because they've got a processing issue, a slow processing that they can learn what they need to learn in half as many problems, and it takes them longer to do the problems. Yeah. And so that might be an accommodation. We're actually adapting the workload. So an accommodation at home might be, this kid, I'm going to expect them to load the dishwasher, but not unload the dishwasher because they're just not ready or don't have the time to do that with everything else. Or
they might need me to stay in the kitchen with them while they're unloading the dishwasher because they need help to stay on track.
Right. Or we might do it together and collaborate with each other because it's still the sequence of how you do it may not be something that they've really landed yet. Well, so an accommodation is very often actually modifying the expectation to meet them where they are developmentally. Yeah. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is. And I think that the bottom line is like, we want to make sure that we're creating space for them to be where they are, right? It's a sort of accommodation requires, we always say, meet them where they are and raise the bar from there, right? So it's this sort of this exercise that you need to go through when you're accommodating What's coming up for me, Elaine, is like when parents always say, well, am I supporting or am I enabling? Right. And it's this sort of, if you're actively partnering to figure out, okay, so what am I doing to help this kid to become more independent? Am I challenging them to be as independent as they're able to be most days? It's that sort of paying attention to that balance of, rather than just, okay, I'm just going to clean their room for them for the rest of their lives because I like their rooms clean, versus, okay, I'm going to have them sit in the room with me and help me clean their room. And then eventually they'll get to
We're going to do it together, and then they're going to take the lead, right?
Yeah. So there's some other things that kind of come into accommodating. And part of this is like making it okay to make mistakes, right? It's just sort of, there's this sort of, if you're accommodating, again, we're experimenting, right? So it's this sort of, sometimes the things we try will work and sometimes they won't work. And so there's this energy of gentleness and experimentation that I think becomes important, even in accommodating kind of things.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no right answer. Sometimes we're going to have to figure out what the accommodation is and what needs to be done to help set. The goal of an accommodation is to level the playing field and set our kids up for success, because that's going to breed more success. And so that means to meet them where they are developmentally, as we've been talking about, and help them be able to do what they're able to do. If there are too many steps, we need to maybe reduce the steps or make the steps stickier or do something to help them be successful. The classic thing is is the step stool, right? If they can't see over the fence, then you may have to put a step stool there to help them see over the fence, or you may have to put a hole in the fence so they can see through the fence. Those are accommodations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So the third A is act. What do you want to say about
this? Is where we all want to be, right? This is where we all typically start. It's like, let me do some action. Let me do something. So I think kind of like the avoid one, when we talk about act, we have to talk about our action and their action. Is that fair?
It is. And I think that, so then to go back to avoid, right? We were avoiding reacting, which is like letting our fears be the ones in the lead, or our worries, or our, future tripping and
frustrating.
Yeah. If we our actions are driven by emotion rather than conscious action. This is the conscious action piece. So the first action might actually be, how do I regulate myself? How do I keep myself regulated so that I can decide, when is it time to act? When is it time to accommodate? When is it time to whatever it is? It's just so there's this knowing when to act and when not to act, is this discernment that I think is an important piece of the puzzle here.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, so is the self-regulation piece. So part of action, our lens, our action is making sure we're acting from a place of calm.
Well, and then the second part of that is making sure that your kid is in a place of calm to collaborate with you or to act with you, right? It's just sort of, so many times, we're ready to go, we're trying to make something happen, and our kids are spun out and upset and scared and overwhelmed and whatever else. And so again, it's this sort of conscious action to go, okay, is the family system regulated?
Commit to calm.
Before I act, right? It's just commit to calm is the first one, right?
That's what we're talking about, is commit to calm. Before you take action, make sure any action that everyone is calm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's about determining what's the appropriate action to experiment with, to take for whatever behavior it is you're trying to address. So what we've identified here is sometimes we're going to leave some behaviors on the side for the moment. Sometimes we're going to accommodate with the behaviors. And this is about, okay, we're going to help improve the behaviors. This is where, Ross Greene's lagging skill stuff can be really effective. This is the area where it works. It doesn't work as well with the avoid and accommodate, but
those are different buckets, but we're talking,
this is where this stuff comes in, is identifying, this is a great place to look at executive function. What is the underlying executive function challenge that is making this behavior difficult for this child?
And what's a realistic expectation to set for this child? And then how do I help set that kid up for accomplishing the expectation that we're developing for them?
Yeah. So, what just occurred to me? When you talked about the beginning, lagging skills, stress and overwhelm, and communication and trust.
Yeah.
Right. In some ways, we avoid a lot of the stuff we talked about in avoiding was about managing stress and overwhelm and communication trust issues. And a lot of the stuff in accommodation was about creating an environment of trust and setting them up for success to reduce overwhelm and stress.
Mm-hmm.
And in the action realm, a lot of this is, they're all different kinds of executive function. Sometimes it's about continuing to communicate effectively and build trust. And so some of that is going to show up here in terms of our own, that commit to calm piece. But I think otherwise, action really is beginning to improve skills and behaviors. It's like, okay, it's time to address the stuff all over the floor in the room, or helping to clean up after dinner, or this is where we start being able to say, okay, what are appropriate and realistic next expectations to set for this kid? And maybe we're doing it in collaboration with the kid. But
well, no, and that's really where I was going to go, is that part of that is, number one, taking aim and not trying to tackle all of the things at once.
Yeah.
So go listen to us talk about taking aim. So let's capture that in the show notes.
Got it.
And then the second piece of it is knowing what your role is, right? It's just sort of, are you a director, a collaborator, supporter, champion?
In that moment.
Like in that moment, it's like, okay, so I want to move into a collaborative sort of place. I'm trying to get buy-in from my child. I'm working with my child in this action versus this is something that I'm doing as a leader in a leadership role kind of thing.
Yeah. I'm thinking about a conversation I had in a coaching group yesterday for parents of teens. And it was a great conversation. And what part of what we were talking about was, it was knowing when there was, what was in it for them, and taking aim on, like, what's the next area of improvement. So one of the examples was a kid who has trouble getting up and going to school. A lot of people were talking about teens having a hard time waking up and getting to school on time. Mm-hmm. And so, but this kid is getting to work on time meticulously. And so the question became, is there a way to take that value, that motivation that he has to get to work, and help him see how he might use that to take action to get to school on time? Because he did acknowledge that it's embarrassing when he's late for school. So he does have a motivation for it. And so sometimes I think action is about finding what's in it for them and helping them choose what they want to work on next.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and that's the buy-in piece of it. It's like this sort of, we say that, I said this yesterday in the Parents of Young Adults group. It's this sort of, if something's your agenda and not yet their agenda, that might not be the place to start focusing. You want to focus on something that they're interested in seeing changed.
Yes.
As well as you, kind of thing.
Exactly. And so action that's really important to pay attention to, making sure that it's not action for action's sake, or because, maybe it's because your life would be easier, but if you don't get their buy-in, you're not going to get the engagement you need.
So it's conscious action, not from a reactive place. It's action from a place of setting realistic expectations based on executive function, stress, overwhelm, all those things we talked about. And it's consciousness in terms of what's the role you're playing in the action and how engaged you are going to be, or how you're going to be interacting with your child in terms of the action.
And what their agenda is in it.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Exactly.
All right. So those are the 3 A's. When you're tackling challenging issues and you're trying to figure out where to take aim, maybe another framework that might help you do that more effectively is to ask yourself, what behaviors might I need to avoid? What might I want to accommodate? Or what action might I want to see changed? And see if that helps you think through how you're approaching challenges and issues in your family dynamic differently. And let us know. Capture it in the forum. Let us know what you're noticing as you apply the skill.
Awesome. Thanks for listening today. Thanks for being here. And thanks for what you're doing for yourself and for your kids.
At the end of the day, folks, you make an enormous difference. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community, or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For the essentials of Elaine and Diane's coach approach to parenting, download a free tip sheet at impactparents.com/podcast.
Behavior therapy training for parents is actually recommended as a first-line treatment for complex kids. For information about Sanity School, our training program for parents or teachers, which has helped thousands of families around the globe, visit impactparents.com/sanityschool.